So this is the worst best practices. I am going to attempt to look into the camera. This is the slide that was given to me by CppNow. This is the slide that I had originally created, and I couldn't bring myself to delete it, so here it is. Just for the record, if this is not the talk that you intended to be in, then feel free to go ahead and change rooms right now. It's all right. I can see how many people there are here or whatever. So this is the worst best practices, and I'm Jason Turner. I want to give a mild trigger, potential trigger alert warning here. I will be quoting some responses I've received from people over the years. Be some mild cursing, a bit of strong language, some annoying human interaction kind of things. If that bothers you, then again, feel free to leave. And also, this is like the least technical talk I have ever put together. This is going to be thoughts about writing a C++ book in the 2020s. And it ended up being like a 15-year retrospective about what led me to this point and to put this into a talk and to create a book about C++. So last chance, if you are hoping for a technical talk by me, not going to happen today. Go ahead and check out another talk that's going on at the conference. I'm sure there are other lovely talks happening. So obligatory introduction. My name is Jason Turner, although, I mean, you know, CppNow is generally a very small conference. Most of us know each other there. I am host of the C++ Weekly YouTube channel. I am co-host of CppCast. I am the guy who did that Commodore talk at CppCon that one time, and author of C++ Best Practices, which is kind of the point of this talk today. I am used to highly interactive talks. I'm used to asking you all to tell me what's wrong on my slides or what's right or give me feedback or that kind of thing. And obviously we can't really do that here. I'm used to pacing a lot while talking. So instead I'm moving my hands a lot, which I don't know, the background eraser thing here is probably not going to keep up with Gray. I can't really do either of those things while talking here. I know some people have set up things where they can walk around when they give their talk. I don't have that set up. However, I am now at this point over the last year, I've gotten used to following along with live chats in my YouTube streams. So I have done a few long YouTube streams on my channel, and I am generally able to respond and interact with the people that are typing into the stream window. And so I'm going to ask you to just go ahead and chat and keep things lively and help me keep my sanity while I'm doing this talk. I'm also maybe going to try to follow along with the Discord. So I just gave a quick shout out on there. I do have all these windows open. We'll see what happens. I might drive myself insane. You can use the Q&A part of Zoom as well, and we will see what happens. All right, so just another quick clarification. This talk is being presented because there was a gap in the schedule. Basically, they needed to fill a gap. And so I was asked if I could give a talk at CppNow this year. And I didn't have anything planned. And I thought, well, if I'm going to talk about the book, then I have to think, where am I going to start? And I thought, well, how about I start at the beginning? It seems like a perfectly logical place to start. But then I didn't know what the beginning was, actually. I had to go back and think about it. I decided to start blogging about C++ in May of 2006. I started going through this book called C++ in a Nutshell. It's from O'Reilly, published in 2003. I only very recently got rid of it. I'm pretty sure I don't have it anymore. It would be back there if I did. Not that you could see that. Is this tiny little pocket. Oh, no, sorry. The In a Nutshell is a much thicker one. The wrong book, right? That was a much bigger one. As far as I know, it hasn't been updated since 2003, but I could be wrong. But things got out of hand, went downhill pretty quickly, pretty much as in the very first article that I decided to write about C++. This was my first article that I wrote about C++, and this was in May 13th of 2006. And the article is types of C++ inheritance. And I say in C++, there are 3 types of inheritance: public, protected, and private. Now, what's wrong with this article? Anyone have any thoughts? Arguably, since I'm not seeing any comments from anyone, these are not types of inheritance. These are access modifiers. These are not types of inheritance. Yeah, Ben, multiple single inheritance. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So this article was published in 2006, and in 2007 here, I have this person who commented on my website, "This is effing wrong." Ooh, give people time to type on a mobile device that is slow. Okay, I'll keep that in mind, Peter. I didn't know anyone was using mobile devices. So in 2007 says, this is effing wrong. And then in 2008 in May, I get, this is completely wrong. There are 3 types of inheritance, which are single, multiple, and multi-level inheritance. Given here are the levels of visibility. And the more I reread this comment, now granted, I could receive this comment 13 years ago. The more I reread it now, preparing for this talk, I'm like, single inheritance and multiple inheritance, are those really different types of inheritance in C++? I really don't think so. To the compiler, they're basically the same thing. Multi-level inheritance, I also don't think the compiler sees that as something different, but I could be wrong. There's definitely virtual and non-virtual inheritance. Those are definitely 2 different types of inheritance in C++ that fundamentally change the way the compiler looks at the code, but whatever, that's here or there. I respond to this poster. I'm like, yes, this has been restated in the article itself and by 2 other commenters. This doesn't necessarily stop people from commenting, however. So a couple months later, dude, how do you take interviews? I don't know how the hell you interview other candidates when you don't know these simple concepts. Try reading C++ for beginners. I'm like, okay, thanks for the feedback. That's well written. And then this is my favorite comment I've ever received on anything that I've ever given. I shed a tear. Jason, if you are interviewing candidates, I shed a tear for the future of your company. Go back to the basics and stop pretending you know C++. So what did I see in common with these posts? Do you see anything in common with these posts? That kind of came out, anything that you would like to mention? That people suffer from Dunning-Kruger. Nobody knows it. Yeah. A lack of better answers. Don't read the comments. The internet is harsh. None of them actually correct you. They just say you're wrong. Yeah, right? A lot of ad hominem. Yeah. Destructive. I love the comments that are coming in here. Not constructive versus destructive. Definitely different things related. Other thing that no one else has noticed necessarily is that they kept coming in for years after the article was written. I published that article in 2005. The later comments were in 2008 about it. They repeated what other people had already said. It seems that the posters actually wanted to make me feel bad. They were not there to correct my error. They were trying to make me feel bad about myself and about the work that I had put into this article, which I find strange. Like, I don't know, forget Dunning-Kruger. It's almost like people get in a masochistic way, perhaps wanted to make me feel bad. I'm not sure. Or that's sadistic. I can never keep those 2 straight, whatever. Most of them were anonymous. And just out of curiosity, are any of them you? Are you in the room today? It's possible. I don't know. It's not a very big room, but it's possible. You needed to be punished, yeah. It seems like it's not only did they want to feel smarter than me, but they wanted to punish me in some way. It's weird. They would be like to belittle other people. Some of the comments are saying here. And a lot of people say, I see a lot of this in the workplace. People still have the idea that the ability to put something out there corresponds with building yourself up, and they think that makes you a target. Yeah, we might brush on that a little bit. So just for the record, when I was preparing this talk and practicing it, I could not get it to last more than an hour, and I didn't know if I was going to get enough interactions that this would end up being a full hour and a half talk, or if I'd end up finishing early. So we'll see what happens. Looks like the interactions are coming in great. Thank you, everyone, for that. So I learned the internet enjoys being mean anonymously, for whatever reason. If you can filter out the hate, there's often actually something to learn. While the responses that they gave me back weren't necessarily useful or constructive, they did point out that I actually did have an error in that article, which is something. I also learned once it's on the internet, it's on the internet. The comment system on my website is long gone. That was a Drupal-based system that has since been imported into GitHub pages, and it's now a bunch of markdown files. It was a big conversion effort to get all the URLs lined up, but it worked. But once it's on the internet, it's on the internet. I was able to go find these old comments using the Wayback Machine. The Internet Archive, it remembers everything for us. Better for worse. You can rarely erase your mistakes, but sometimes you can go back and address them and try to move forward. So I tried to address them here. I changed the title of the article to C++ inheritance access specifiers, and I say, in an effort to reduce the number of non-constructive comments posted by visitors who do not read the entire article or previous comments, I have decided to change the title of the article and the initial summary to something more accurate, which was a fair thing to do. Okay, I wrote that article in 2005. Those comments came in over 2006, 2007, 2008, but let's go back to 2006. I'm only really 1 year into trying to understand C++. And the very first thing that I did had a pretty big mistake in it. So I'm 1 year past a pretty bad public blunder as well. But I am starting to see like more myths and misconceptions about C++. And the more I think back about what I was looking at then, the funnier it kind of is to me. So what do I decide to do next? Of course, I decide I'm going to try to help dispel those myths about C++. So I'm 1 year into my journey about C++. Let's see what I can do. So I created this blog post series called Nobody Understands C++, which in retrospect, seems like a bold thing to call it. So this is going to be the first post, this is 2007, of several, though I am not sure how many just yet. The title of this post should be self-explanatory, but I will elaborate. It is my strongly held belief that C++ is generally poorly understood and gets a bad rap because of this misunderstanding, that is. It is also my belief that this is not the fault of C++, but rather the fault of old school C++ developers who learned the language before it was ratified. So in 2007, I'm saying, oh, this is, people who use the language pre-98. Now, to be fair, I had been working with people and interacting with people on the internet who were used to broken compilers. They were used to compilers that didn't have a full template implementation. They were used to standard library implementations that did not have like a string plus operator that would work on both sides. Like they thought that you had to do a standard string plus a character literal, not that you could do a character literal plus a standard string. Yeah, it might have been Visual C6 fault, according to Peter here. But I'm just like, I decide I'm going to start trying to dispel some myths about C++. That was my goal. I'm still learning to communicate very much at this point. So the article series started in 2007 when I barely understood C++, but arguably who really understands C++ anyhow? Peter's comment on GCC 2.95. At that job, we started with 2.95, even though 3.2 was out because no one could figure out how to build GCC 3.2 for the ARM platform that we were targeting. I don't know why. That did get resolved. This blog series eventually grew to 11 parts that I slowly wrote over 4 years. I learned how to present my material better and how to communicate better. Definitely still a lot of grammar issues. I definitely still make a lot of grammar issues. Mistakes. See, I just did it. But one particular article did get some popularity. And this was part 5, template code bloat. I say, on occasion, you'll read or hear something talking about C++ templates causing code bloats. Code bloat. I was thinking about it the other day, and I thought to myself, if the code does exactly the same thing, then the compiled code cannot really be any bigger, right? So I set up a series of experiments. And at this point in my journey of understanding C++, I always had available to me a folder with a bunch of samples, and I would just create new samples and I'd compile them and test them real quick. I said, if I have 3 different functions that are overloads versus one function that's a template called 3 times with the 3 different types of parameters, it has to generate the same code, right? And this is before I had access to Compiler Explorer or anything like that, of course. And I ran this experiment and I saw that, yeah, it actually did create code that was the same size or even smaller than writing the 3 overloads myself. And so this is my first claim to fame as a C++ person here. I did not have accelerated C++. And so I got cited on Wikipedia. The official C++ article on Wikipedia has the citation of my blog post, and I think it's been there for at least 11 years. I didn't do it. And I think that's probably what brought more people to my website, actually, ironically, and then why I got the comments on the earlier stuff. So I believe it was Peter who asked about accelerated C++. I wasn't aware of that book, and you say it would have helped more than the O'Reilly book. The O'Reilly book wasn't about teaching C++ at all. That's a reference. It's kind of like reading the C++ programming language. I was trying to make sure that I was exposed to every single part of C++. That was my goal. My goal was not to learn to read teaching material. My goal was to know what was in the C++ standard. And by doing that, I exposed myself to all kinds of things that I never saw being used in the projects that I actually worked on. So there were a set of resources that influenced me at this time. There was the C++ programming language, which I just mentioned. This is the cover of the 4th edition. I don't have the 4th edition. I have the 3rd edition. It's, well, it's behind me at the moment, actually. C++ programming language. I actually read the 3rd edition all the way through, which is approximately 900 pages. I don't necessarily recommend that you read the C++ programming language all the way through, but it did have a profound impact in how I looked at the language, because I was able to see how Bjarne intended the language to be used. Now, you can go on the internet and find all kinds of C++ examples, and just go ahead and raise your hand if you think the internet is a good place to find good examples of good C++, right? But if I'm reading a book from Bjarne Stroustrup, then it's probably good examples of C++, right? So this is what was one of my main influences. Yeah, I mean, everyone's going to agree, right? Internet's a terrible place to look for good examples of C++. It's really hard to find those. Now, Bjarne's FAQ kind of cracks me up, because this is a screenshot of it from yesterday, right? Which is last updated November 23rd of 2020. It's got translations into Chinese, Belarusian, and Dutch, of course. Those would, I don't know how it ended up with those 3 specific languages, probably people volunteering too. I can't scroll through the page here or anything. Roy just asked, what about Boost? Are you suggesting that I should have read, looking at Boost source code for good examples of good C++? Is that what you're suggesting? I think that's what you're suggesting, Roy. Yes, Roy says. Can you find pieces of Boost that are simple enough for someone who's learning C++ to read them and be able to learn something about writing good C++? That would be, and I have Roland here saying library code's not a good, overly complex, is what some of these people are saying. I think that would be the harder part, but I wasn't actually aware of Boost yet at this point in my journey. But it's possible, yeah, that someone could use it to read about now because it is well-reviewed code. So Bjarne's FAQ is actually really interesting. And it's been around for a very long time. There's lots of little details about C++, lots of ideas about the flexibility and use of C++. It's great for finding quick answers to things, although he does seem to update it. He does seem to update it from time to time and sometimes remove things. And so I went back and I tried to find something else that I was positive was on Bjarne's website, and I couldn't find it. So, oh well, I'm not sure what. If it was ever there, I went back with the Wayback Machine and I wasn't able to find it, so I don't know. Yeah, there's lots of comments here that's saying that reading library code as good examples of clean C++ is probably not your best choice, but Boost example code could be a good bet. So then the next thing that influenced me at this time was C++ coding standards, 101 Rules, Guidelines, Best Practices by Herb Sutter and Andrei Alexandrescu. This book was published in 2004, and most of the guidelines still actually have relevance today, which I find interesting. I just flipped through it again. I hadn't really read it since 2008-ish or something like that. I flipped through it again and I'm like, yeah, you know, most of these things are in here. There's even a few topics about doing some ABI firewalling with C++ types on your DLL boundaries, which might have some relevance to today. Okay, effective C++, which most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, and effective modern C++, of course, came out a few years ago. These are classics. Virtually everyone is aware of them. Effective modern C++. I should mention this before I move on to effective modern C++. My neighbor, who lives right there, was a C++ developer at the time that I got my first C++ job, and he actually required me to read effective C++, before I started my first full-time C++ job, which was interesting. He's like, you have to read this book. We require everyone in our team to read it. Have you ever heard of it? No, I haven't heard of it. So I was required to read that book. So I read that book before I started my, my first full-time job with C++. Effective modern C++, however, was probably had one tiny little point that was one of the things that most caught my attention. There's like two individual moments that I can recall. One is when I had my first job and I learned that return value optimization was a thing. And then when I read effective modern C++ and I learned that declaring an empty destructor breaks my move operations. I went back through ChaiScript at this time because Chai is right in the middle of ChaiScript, and I removed all of the empty destructors that had no reason to be there, and I cleaned up all of my special member functions, and I was able to measure like a 30% performance improvement across the system after I had done that, which just blew my mind. And this really opened my mind up to the idea how small, seemingly meaningless line can have a potentially huge impact on your types, your generated code, and your performance. Yes, it's quite big to say that it was a 30%. It was crazy. It was crazy. Yes, and I'm going to agree with a comment from Ben that effective modern C++ is not a good way to learn C++. And I think it does focus a little bit too heavily on the corner cases, personally. Effective modern C++, that is. All right, time moves forward, and where are we on our slide deck? At approximately the right place. Okay. From 2006 to 2015, I am blogging about C++ regularly. From 2010 into the present, I've been working as a contractor. In 2014, I decided to start this project called GitHub. It's github.com/lefticus/CVP practices to consolidate my experience with common mistakes that I had seen as a developer and as a contractor. So this is 8 years into being a professional C++ programmer. And just for the record, my first experience with C++ actually goes back to 95, but I wouldn't say, or 96, excuse me, I wouldn't say that I was really learning C++ or studying C++ or trying to, make it a focus of my career or anything like that until 2006, which is where all this comes around back to. In 2015, I gave my first ever conference talk, and it was called Thinking Portable, and it was right here at CppNow. And this talk was effectively best practices include being cross-platform. I try to make the argument in this talk that you need to have portability in your code so that you can take a best advantage of the compilers and tools that are available on all of the platforms. Now, since 2015, we've had a lot more cross-pollination of tools. We have Address Sanitizer on Windows available. We have Clang on Windows available. We still don't have Visual Studio Static Analyzer available on Linux, but we're getting more cross-pollination. In 2015, I also gave a talk at CppNow called IIFE for Performance and Safety. And this is effectively using immediately invoked Lambda expressions is a best practice, basically, because it gets you thinking about initialization. Although it took me many years to actually, or several years to actually learn how to articulate that better. At the time, I just knew, hey, look, if you use immediately invoked Lambda expressions, you can get these advantages in your code, both performance and cleaner code. 2015, CppNow. Then in 2015 at CppCon, the current state of free static analysis. This is what common errors do we make in our C++ code and what free static analysis tools can actually catch these errors. This is, again, a best practices talk. Common errors that should be avoided and how we should use our static analysis tools to catch things where they can. Also in 2015, I was approached by O'Reilly to do a video series, which now starts to get us back around to what it meant to have worked on this book. This was Learning C++ Best Practices by Jason Turner, released March 2016, published under the O'Reilly banner. It's still available if you're interested in going on Safari Books online. It's no longer available for sale. But what is this? Can you make out what is on this screenshot, what they chose for the cover thumbnail for my talk right here? It is a very early version of Compile Explorer. Sure enough, when I showed screenshots from Compile Explorer in that talk in 2015, it's the 2016 talk that we'll be getting to in a moment. I had people like, what? Where did that come from? I've never seen Compiler Explorer before. That's awesome. Like, how do I use this tool? So that was fun. But yeah, that's a really early version of Compiler Explorer hidden there in the screenshot. Working with a publisher was a very valuable experience. they have very high quality standards, for sure. They sorted out all of the copyright, distribution, et cetera for me. But all of my slides had to match their style. And communication was not always perfect. And this is kind of funny. You can read the words here, but I'll tell the story. I had worked with them for a long time. I had handed them all of the material. I'm waiting to find out, when is this going to go up for sale? When is it going to be released on Safari? I'm curious what people are going to think of this video series and all this stuff. And I'm waiting for this to happen. And then I go on Reddit /r/CPP at some point one day, and I see that like one of the top posted articles is a learning C++ best practices link on YouTube. And it turns out that like one of the very first people to purchase the video series from O'Reilly took all the videos, immediately uploaded them to YouTube, and then shared it on Reddit. And I'm like, this is, when did I, I didn't even know this thing had been released, and here it is shared on Reddit and uploaded to YouTube. So that was a little disappointing. We have a QA question here from anonymous attendee. I don't know if they're just trying to be cheeky. Ask me, when and how did you attend your, did I quit, my day job? I did leave that part out here, and that is a bit of a long story to get into, but that was in 2010. I had been looking for a good excuse for a while to be able to leave my regular job and move into contracting. And the opportunity was presented to me by someone who saw one of the open source projects that I had been working on and asked if I could do something kind of like that for them. And I did. I coincidentally was kind of reaching the end of the road at the job that I currently had. So I left that job and I moved into contracting. And I think it's worth taking a moment to point out here that this timeline that starts in 2015, when I started giving the conference talks, was actually during a lull in contracting work, which meant that I had a lot of extra time available to do things like present at conferences. And that's a bit of a theme in my career, which is kind of weird. And I certainly don't want to suggest this to anyone, but I have learned for myself that being unemployed or underemployed actually presents a lot of opportunities to me. And it is when I've had the most significant changes in my career has been during those times when I've been unemployed or underemployed. It's kind of a strange way to think about it. And it didn't really sink in until I was being interviewed by my cousin on his YouTube channel last month. But anyhow. So I had time to work on this video series because I didn't have enough contract work. So I worked on the video series. 2016 rolls around. This is when I start C++ Weekly. And in 2016, I gave the talk Practical Performance Practices. And this is where I shared a lot of code that had come from Compiler Explorer, and people had their minds blown by it. This was at CppNow 2016. But this is, again, another look at best practices. I'm saying, how can I write good, clean, maintainable, simple code that actually has a huge impact on performance? Like, for example, not declaring a destructor when I don't need to declare a destructor. Then 2016, I also gave this Rich Code for Tiny Computers talk at CppCon, which, yeah, that's the Commodore talk at CppCon. And this is effectively best practices in C++ made entertaining. That's what I was kind of going for here. It was largely born out of the fact that I had seen other conference talks where people say, I can't afford to use the modern C++ standards because they have too much overhead. And I said, they don't have any overhead if used correctly. What are you talking about? So I put together this talk. This brings me to the beard. The beard. I have the beard right now. Around this time, after that talk went live, I would see people randomly choosing to comment on my beard. Just for the record, I've had this beard for a very long time. I've had it for nearly 20 years now. People would comment, does he think he looks good with that beard in a YouTube video? Or you should lose the beard. And it's funny because you can get like 100 positive comments about your talk and have one person comment on your looks, and that just throws everything else off, right? That's the one thing that you focus on. But at least I knew I wasn't alone in this. So Scott Myers famously has his long hair. He's always had it. It's been on the back cover of every one of his books. This is from Scott Myers' website. This is from the view from Aristia, his aristia.com, however you pronounce that. I probably should have put a link to it. It says, and I really want you to read between the lines here. During my talk at CppCon yesterday, I decided to liven things up by asking the audience to answer a question that comes up often. Who does my hairstyle make me look like? The next sentence, very poignant to me. He says, people volunteer answers to this question, which until now, I've never asked on a surprisingly frequent basis. Effectively, Scott is saying, why do people keep talking about my hair? And so he just decided just go ahead and bring out, this is at CppCon 2014, which I think was the first CppCon. And it's interesting, he still has this article up on his website to read this, that like even Scott was like, seriously, why do you keep talking about my hair? Ben, I'll look at your comment in a minute. Question. So the beard. This just further solidified the notion to me that by choosing to do things in the public, I'm inviting public comments. If you are that person who somehow thinks that you're being helpful or complimentary by commenting on someone's appearance, I just have one word of advice for you. Stop. Any comment on someone's appearance is unwelcomed and unprofessional. Now, I know someone's going to get pedantic with me. Yeah, okay, if you want to say, hey, there's toilet paper trailing from your shoe after they got out of the bathroom, that's clearly not what I'm talking about here, right? I know that the comments that I get are nothing compared to the comments that some members of our community get. I've seen a few recent comments and attacks, paraphrased, things like, drop the girl, she sounds like a robot, or from your LinkedIn profile, you appear to have only worked on one project. And people sometimes think that they are being complimentary. I've seen comments a number of times that are like, a girl who knows how to program? I've never met anyone like that before. How do I meet girls who know how to program, or girls who are technical? Besides the fact that you're referring to grown adult women as girls, it's weird. Don't do that. It's not welcomed comments. And I also saw recently someone comment to a woman telling her respect is earned. Basically, he was saying to her, you have not earned my respect yet, therefore your technical arguments don't hold any weight with me. That was a much longer conversation. And I just want to state, respect is not earned. Respect should be implied. You start from a position of respecting people until they have a reason to prove otherwise. If it's the only way we can have reasonable communication in the community here. But in 2021, I decided I'm just going to go ahead and own the beard. So I have the bearded avatar, which I love. I think he's awesome. Most comments I see about the new avatar have been great. A lot of people say that they really like it. One comment during a live stream that I gave, when only the avatar was visible, was, is he a Jew? That was like literally the first comment on the live stream. And I'm like, what is this? How does this have any relevance to anything at all? Does it affect my presentation or my YouTube stream in any way whatsoever? I just decided at this point, I really don't get people. Yeah. Is it trolling? I don't know. Is it, I don't know, but stop being that person. If you're that person, you're watching the show, stop being that person. I just for the record, for people who are curious about what I did when I saw that YouTube comment, was I just put the person in 30-minute timeout. So they couldn't say anything at all for the next 30 minutes. And when they came back, they didn't say anything else that was inappropriate. All right, so before I move to the next thing, Ben asked, when would you say you started to draw on your contracting experiences, practically applying best practices to legacy code bases versus perhaps more personal experiences? Because I feel like that gives you a good authority boost. I see. Yeah, when I first became a contractor, I definitely made a fair number of mistakes. And I think it was partially because I was still young and wanted to prove myself and was thinking, well, if the client asks for something, I'm going to say, well, of course I can do that thing because I can do all of the things because I'm the contractor that you hired on this project. And the main thing that I feel like I really had to learn to really be able to put together conference talks and stuff that, like Ben says, maybe have an authority boost to them, was to learn how to say no, basically, to say, instead of saying, yes, I can do that, say, no, that's a bad idea to do that. So by learning how to tell the client no, which means earning less money often, someone wants to pay you to do something, but it's a terrible idea. Learning how to say no and earn less money, but gain respect and authority at the same time is a key skill, I think, as a contractor. They're willing to keep paying you after that because they know that you're not doing it just for the money. And then that also gave me more experiences I needed for training and speaking and such. All right, so 2017, 2019, I was approached by several companies about C++ books, approached by other companies about C++ videos. But by now, because of C++ Weekly, I knew I preferred doing things on my own terms and in my own style. And I had heard that writing a book is really hard and takes a lot of work, and it's unlikely to make any money. And I'm like, that doesn't sound like fun. Who's going to do that? So I had no interest. I had people that would ask me hey, when are you going to write a book? And I'm like, doesn't seem like something I want to do really. 2017, Practical C++ 17. This is a talk that's basically what are some of the best practices for using C++ 17. And then Practical Const Expert. This was born out of the talk that Ben and I gave, Const Expert for All the Things, which is more about how do I actually apply Const Expert in a best practices kind of way in my code. And then I gave my C++ best practices course for the first time at CppCon 2017. This is where I'm really starting to solidify the stuff that comes together. 2018, I gave a talk called Applied Best Practices. What happens when you apply all of these things in a new greenfield project? And Surprises and Object Lifetime. Both of those talks were at CppCon 2018. I don't think I gave them at any other conference. And Surprises and Object Lifetime is basically why we need best practices, because there's still things that compilers and static analysis tools can't catch. So we need some rules still for teaching us how to properly handle the lifetime of our objects. 2019, at Core C++. 2019 was a busy year. I went to 13 different countries in 2019 and spoke at 6 different conferences, I think, in 5 different countries, something like that. But here's some highlights. The best parts of C++ I gave for the first time at Core C++, and this is how the language has evolved and how it can make some of our best practices easier. Then at NDC Tech Town 2019, C++ Code Smells, and it's ultimately, using const is the ultimate best practice. That's basically the point of that talk. And then great C++ is trivial. And this is a best practice for keeping our types simple, so they're more optimizable. Are we starting to see a pattern to all of the talks that I've given? And, you know, it wasn't really until 2019 that I even indeed saw the pattern myself, which brings us to 2020. I'm starting to get tired of repeating myself. I realize that at this point, by 2020, I have presented everything that I thought was important to put into a conference talk. And I had presented them at least once each time. And I have no idea what I'm going to present in 2020 because I've already presented everything that I had to say. Well, 2020, fortunately, to some extent or unfortunately, solved that problem for me. I didn't have to come up with any conference talks in 2020. But early in the year, I thought maybe I'll have some fun on Twitter. So I put out this, for 2020, I'm doing a one C++ best practice per retweet thread. I wrote my first blog about C++ best practices in 2007. I stated this at the time, although realizing that it actually went back to about 2006. In many ways, I've been repeating myself over and over again. So here's my thread. I got 220 retweets. I could not possibly keep up with that, but I ended up doing 41 best practices, and I had a pretty solid outline for a book when I was done. No way I could keep up. I had a couple of people actually asking, hey, when can we get a book version of this? And I finally thought, maybe if now I can find some way to self-publish on my own terms and in my own style, maybe I'll go ahead and give it a try. And it turned out that I had a little bit of extra unplanned time available to me in 2020. Again, this is a pattern. It was 2004 was the first time I was unemployed, and then 2010, and then 2015, and then 2020. So it seems about once every 5-ish years, I end up with some extra unplanned time in my schedule because life changes and it opens up some other opportunity. And I realized I had about 15 years of notes and training materials and topics and articles and conference material that I could put together. So I decided to self-publish with LeanPub. The pros, LeanPub is used already by several other C++ authors. Bartweme, Reiner, and Nikolai notably have several books published each on there. It uses a flavor of Markdown. All of my websites and presentations, everything that I can possibly do, I do in Markdown. I type naturally in Markdown. It's very comfortable for me. And so that was very appealing. Although I will say, just for the record, that this particular presentation is not published in Markdown. I did this with Google Slides, slides.google.com, whatever it's called, because I've been experimenting with different ways of presenting this whole year. So I've presented at my own meetup a few times in the last year, and just it's been an experiment each time. And the leanpub.com documents can be exported for print-ready versions, easy to send off for a dead tree version if you're so inclined. You have complete control over pricing, and you get to keep 80% of the profits. Buyers can pay more if they choose to, and a surprising to me number of people actually do choose to pay more than the minimum price. And they can return the book for a full refund if they are unsatisfied. And this actually becomes an important note in a moment here. The cons are, it can sometimes be difficult to get the analysis you need from the book generator when things go wrong. So if you make your manuscript and you push it up to LeanPub and you say, please generate the PDF version of this, sometimes things will go wrong and like half of your manuscript will be missing and you have no idea why. And trying to get this error report back from the system can be difficult. Page flow and layout can be a little bit fiddly. It tries to be fully automatic. So sometimes you're like, hey, your automatically smart page break really didn't make sense here. You need to go in and put in a page break, or for example. And for advanced features, there's a monthly fee on the system, but you can buy a lifetime option, and you can buy that straight out of your book earnings if you're inclined to. And just for the record, I don't mean this to be an ad for LeanPub. This has just been my experience with self-publishing and publishing a book in 2020. They have this refund policy that's awesome. It's like 45 days from the time that someone buys a book that they can return it. Now, keep in mind that they buy your book, they downloaded the PDF, they've downloaded the EPUB, the whatever. And if they return it, it's not like they're returning it, right? There's no DRM on these things, but very few people do that. So let's just say, hypothetically, you want to create a book, but you have imposter syndrome, as we all do, really, except for perhaps the people who comment on your YouTube videos. Maybe they don't. So you're afraid to release your book because you're like, I don't know, do I actually have something of value here to share with the world? This refund policy is perfect because you can put the book up for sale. People don't like it. For sale. I think I used the wrong word there. See, grammar, it's hard. People don't like it, they return it. It makes less money, but now you know, and you've kind of mitigated any of your concerns about your imposter syndrome here. LeanPub also allows in-progress publication. Anonymous attendee just said, I have imposter syndrome, just commenting in here, which is, yeah, I get it. LeanPub also allows in-progress publication, which really works if you've got this imposter syndrome, but you want to try publication. You can make your book available for purchase at any time. You can get feedback from your interested readers quickly. You can gauge the interest in your book, gauge how much you think the book should end up costing, play with different prices, whatever, and publish updates to your readers instantly. And this was really great for me because I got lots of early readers giving me feedback on mistakes that I had in the book or things that I should have corrected or whatever. And this, in my opinion, further reduces the impact of your imposter syndrome if you want to give this self-publication thing a try. So self-publication is great, but there are definitely some caveats. There's no one to advertise for you. There's lower discoverability of your work. By discoverability, I mean, if you're searching on Amazon for the top-rated C++ books, you're going to get a list of books, right? People don't have to go find your custom website or something. You don't have a paid editor there to help you with your grammar and such. And you are 100% responsible for quality control. And there might be a perception of lower credibility for self-published books, which is interesting. I mean, like if a book is published by O'Reilly, it tends to just kind of naturally carry a little bit more credibility than if it was published by some guy named Jason on some self-publishing website. Without an editor and a publisher pushing you, it can be really hard to wrap it up and get the book published. It's that last 10% thing. So I can address several of these points. No one to advertise for you. Social media and isocpp.org can help you get the word out. So Ben Dean asked, did you consider getting or actually get feedback from early drafts from your network of C++ community experts, or did you just go with user feedback from LeanPub? Well, interestingly, Ben, you're one of the C++ community experts who did give me some feedback that went into corrections for the book before I published it. So I would say, yes, I did get feedback from earlier drafts before I got it fully public. But I did it in several phases. I got it like 100% done and had it shared with my patrons, which was a huge help for me because I created a new patron tier on Patreon that was book supporter. And so you get a free copy of the book if you support it at that level. And I got lots of feedback from those. And a lot of the people who I just interact with naturally on Twitter or on Patreon or Discord or whatever are experts in the C++ community that I have the privilege of calling friends. And so they have gave me a fair bit of feedback before I got to the point of being able to send off for the Dead Tree version, which I think is this is a good point as well, with the ability to publish updates and fixes very easily on LeanPub. So even though I did publish it and say it's 100% done, and it still had some mistakes in it and some corrections that needed to happen, I was able to correct those things and then just publish it really quick, which sends an email out to all of the people who had already bought the book and say, here, sorry, I corrected a few things here. And so it felt like it lowered the risk for me and for the purchasers. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about marketing in a moment, Peter. So we've got social media. I've got Twitter, LinkedIn, the Facebook C++ groups, Slack, Discord, isocpp.org. If you post something to isocpp.org, they like to have a publication for a list for all of the recently published books and that kind of thing. So they're likely to approve that and get it up, and that's going to get you more exposure as well. And then this comment of lower discoverability of your work. If you use LeanPub like I did and like several other the C++ authors have, you get grouped with the other popular C++ books. And when you see the list of C++ books, you get recommended other C++ books that are on there. So that helps increase the discoverability as well. The comment that there is no editor available to help, that is a big issue. I actually used Grammarly.com. I know you've probably seen 1,000 YouTube ads for them like I have, but it was actually useful. I created an account, and then for each section, I would just copy it into their website because I didn't want to install any of their web browser extensions or anything like that, and do the corrections and then copy it and paste it back into my Markdown document. And that worked better than I was afraid it was going to when I first decided to go that route. You are 100% responsible for quality control. Now, if you do enlist the help of other people that you know and trust in the community, then that is definitely a big help as well. But it is a hard thing to address, and you just have to deal with it. There might be a perception of lower credibility for self-published works. I definitely noticed that. And I found this interesting phenomenon that making a printed version of the book available actually seems to increase the credibility. It's the exact same work, but now I can go buy a printed version from Amazon. Well, there's the barrier to entry to self-publishing on Amazon is no different than the barrier to entry to self-publishing on LeanPub. Yet somehow that seemed to increase the credibility. And without an editor and a publisher pushing you, it is definitely harder to wrap things up and actually get the book published. But the promise that you make to your early buyers helps a lot in that, because you're like, well, 100 people have already bought this book. I have to finish it. So we talk a little bit about sales performance. By leveraging social media for advertising, running sale promotions, I've averaged about 12 sales per day currently. I definitely have the advantage that I've got C++ weekly episodes that are up, and I have now put a link to the book in every single one of those C++ weekly descriptions. If you run a few large promotions, if you remove, a few large promotions that I ran, then my average sales is actually closer to 5 sales per day. So this kind of gets back to Peter's question about how much time do I spend on marketing on social media. I don't spend a lot of time on it, but I have to choose to do it. And it comes with a few caveats. But notice the difference here. If you remove the large sales promotions, then I average about 5 sales per day. So I've had a total of 18 returns at the time that I looked this up for this talk, which was a few days ago. And people who do return it comment that the book was shorter than they expected it to be, which I find a little confusing because it says exactly how long the book is on the thing. Someone asked, can you do mass updates of YouTube descriptions to add a link when you have a few hundred videos like that, or do you do it manually? I actually pay for another service called TubeBuddy, which costs a few dollars a month. It's not very expensive. And I can say, go do a regular expression, find, replace, or, well, maybe not a full regex, but I can say, go do a find and replace in all of my video descriptions, and it can go through and do them all at once. And it has saved me hundreds of hours, I think, at this point. Well worth the money for me once I had more than 100 videos up. Probably well worth the money once I had more than 50 videos up. For regular sales, about 53% of people choose to pay more than the minimum price. And that is also just interesting to me. It kind of shows the generosity of people that want to support the community, want to support self-publishers, and want to support the C++ book world out there. Another interesting statistic to me, though, is that if I run a sale promotion, and this gets back again to Peter's question about how much time do I spend? I don't spend a lot of time promoting the book, but I have to decide, okay, if I'm going to put the book is now 25% off, here's a coupon for the next 2 days, and I put that up on Twitter, that's going to get retweets and it's going to get likes, and because people like a sale. If I do that, if I put a sale promotion coupon out there, almost no one pays above the sale price, even though they still can. But when it's not on sale, 53% of the people choose to pay more than the minimum price for the book. I don't know if that's a question of demographics of who's clicking on the sales, if it's more impulse buy versus people who are choose to do whatever. Ben asked, does LeanPub show the mean price people choose? Humble Bundle does, and it anecdotally has a social effect. No, I do not believe that people show the mean. You mean to the public? It shows the mean price to me. It does not show it to regular viewers. Website, people coming to the website. So the title of this talk was the worst best practices. And so we get to some of the book criticism, whatever. But in my experience, if people pay for something, they're less likely to criticize it, which is interesting. I'm sure there's some sociological study about that. If they are dissatisfied, they tend to just return the item and move on with their lives. The already mentioned criticism that I got that it's too short. One friend sent me several pages of notes on issues and suggested changes about 6 months after it was published, including changes to the ordering of items. But sorry, I just can't do that. If you have a book with a bunch of ordered item numbers, you can't change the order of the items. That would be an ABI break. Coworkers can no longer say, oh, you need to go look at item number 8 in Jason's book if the second edition has items 8 and 9 switched. It's just simply not really an option. So be aware of that. After book initialization, yeah, let's go with that. Okay. So one thing I just want to comment on is that you should properly set expectations. So you let your potential readers or viewers know what they are going to get. And I just wrote this slide, so there's probably errors in it. This can easily become like a self-deprecating humor kind of thing or devaluing of your material, particularly if you've got this imposter syndrome. You don't want to do that. You don't want to devalue your material. You don't want to go with self-deprecating humor. You just want to set expectations. And it's what I tried to do with this talk. I started right out. I let you know that there's going to be quotes from people that might trigger, that it's going to have some mild cursing and some strong language if that bothers you. And then I let you know that this is going to be a 15-year retrospective and probably the least technical talk that I've ever done. And I can see by looking at the count of people here that I've only lost, I think, 5 attendees through an hour. So I think we're doing okay. So what were actually the most controversial topics in my book? I actually don't really have data for this. I'm sorry. Comment, this would be a huge tip for authors and speakers. Don't devalue your material. Your audience want and expect authority. Yeah, don't devalue the material. It's kind of an aside, like, I hate calling myself an expert in C++ because there's so many people who know so many more and so many different things than I do. And I know where the gaps in my knowledge are. But as someone who's marketing myself and my book as a contractor, sometimes I have to say that I'm an expert in C++. Otherwise, I mean, I can't go to a potential client and be like, well, yeah, I kind of know C++, but not as much as Ben knows C++, right? Like that's not really productive to building a business. So, yeah, as an aside. So I don't actually have data about what people thought was the most controversial topic. And considering most of the things that I've been discussing for like 15 years now, I would actually have been surprised is if I had gotten a lot of criticism back for it, because there's very few things that are new in here. So I went ahead and decided to invite criticism. I asked Twitter, I said, for those of you who have read my C++ Best Practices book, which one, please try to limit to one, topic is the most controversial? Which section did you disagree with the most? I got 2 joking responses, which were actually friendly jokes. One response that was partially a misunderstanding of what I had in the book, so I clarified that misunderstanding. 2 comments about no discard, and 1 comment about the learn another language section, and 1 comment about switch default style. I found this to be just sweet irony. The one time I actually ask people to criticize my work, I get very little criticism back. So that's the internet. Relatedly, I just had someone on Twitter tell me that they no longer follow me because I don't put enough effort into my YouTube videos, which I, interjected the free part here because, they weren't paying for those videos. They get them for free. They no longer follow me because I don't put enough effort into those videos. So what is the worst best practice? Couple of comments here. We are running low on time. Number 9, C++ is not magic. Jake comments, nothing will convince me that const expr isn't just a really awkward alternative spelling for abracadabra. That's funny. Number 11, learn another language. And Ben, since you're here, you can help me out. I should invite you in as a panelist so you can talk too. Learning more programming languages exposes you to more ways of programming. Now, this particular person commented that I say learn another language and I give a list, but I don't tell them why, what they will gain from learning these other languages. This knowledge then expands the way you look at your C++ code. And with an expanded viewpoint, you consider more options. I didn't do a good job of explaining this in the book. The languages listed were taken from Ben's blog, and I do actually cite Ben. So let's go ahead and dig into it for a few minutes. We're running low on time. Ben says, the Algol family, C and its descendants. 4th, Lisp and its dialects, Haskell, Smalltalk, Erlang, and then as a side note on reflection, Ben says, I would probably add Prolog to this list as well, which would make it 7 languages worth knowing. Algol and the C family, that's pretty much why we're all here. It's functions, it's pointers. We all have a pretty decent understanding of how these things work, probably if we're attending C++ now. 4th, according to Wikipedia, 4th relies on explicit use of data stack and reverse Polish notation, which is commonly used in calculators from Hewlett-Packard. This already makes it much different than C++. I've never programmed in a pure stack-based language. That's interesting. Oh, Ben, you were actually given power to speak if you want to. You can unmute yourself.
I was invited to unmute.
Yes, you were invited to unmute. So you are in the recording for all eternity now if you want to comment on any of these.
Let me know when if you want me to comment. It's your talk. I'm staying silent until you ask me.
Okay. Perhaps, I don't know, whenever you want to. Let's see. So Ben says Lisp and its dialects. Lisp says the biggest change here is that code is data. And I think like some of us have some experience with functional programming languages. Is Lisp a pure functional programming language, Ben?
It's not pure.
Okay. Is there any such thing as a pure functional programming language left?
Haskell is pretty pure.
Okay. So then that brings us to Haskell, which you said is even more mind-bending than Lisp. Is that because it's more of a pure functional programming language?
Yes, there is no assignment, and therefore there is no iteration, right? Everything is recursion.
Okay. Which is even programming in Lisp in university, it broke my brain trying to do everything in recursion. Like I just couldn't quite do it. And I did try, I comment here on the slide that I tried reading Real World Haskell, and I got a few chapters in, but I didn't get very far. Have you gone through that book?
Yes, Real World Haskell, it was published around 2008, I think. And that was about when I read it, when it came out.
That was probably about when I purchased it and didn't read it as well. All right. Small talk. I love this description of small talk. This is the Wikipedia description. Small talk was created as the language underpinning the new world of computing, exemplified by human-computer symbiosis. This is small talk from the 70s. So that's the mind blown meme, just in case you didn't catch that. I don't have the animated version here. And have you programmed in Smalltalk, Ben?
No, Smalltalk is the one here that I have least experience with.
Okay.
But it's notable, all of these languages represent really different computational paradigms. And so Connor has also talked about this.
Right. Yeah, if there's someone can link to it, if you have a specific talk from either Ben or Connor about one of these, about like really expanding your mind by learning other programming languages, that would be awesome to share here. I know there's got to be one somewhere. Erlang, I've known a few people who've programmed in Erlang professionally. This thing should make all of us go, what? Because it's designed for distributed, fault-tolerant, real-time, highly available hot swap systems where code can be changed without stopping. Like, we don't do that in C++, right? Someone did share a link to a video in the chat. So that's, if you could share the name of that video, then I'll read it aloud also for the listeners to the talk, the title of it. That'd be great. Prolog is actually one of these languages that I enjoyed programming in university. I took a comparative programming languages course, and Prolog I had a lot of fun with. Okay. Oh, Algorithm Intuition by Connor Hoekstra. Okay. Does he? Oh, he does talk about some other languages there, doesn't he? Okay, that's a good point. And this actually, Connor's whole channel, now that I think about it, a lot of it is language comparison of solutions to programming problems. So another reason to look at it. It says there's a notable lack of modern trendy languages like Swift, Rust, and Go. That's because nothing new is actually new. Those things are all like, they just rehash ideas from the 60s. I might be overstating things here. Prolog is a declarative language where you just make a set of relationship declarations. You say this thing is related to this thing is a type of this thing means this other thing. And then you query the system and say, well, I have all of these things. What does it mean? And it does like formal logic calculations and tells you like what that thing means. So some of the classic examples for Prolog are like building a family tree or something and then saying, who is Jason's grandfather? And it will like, and it's able to like, using its formal logic rules or whatever, tell you that. Yes, and Connor also has a programming languages meetup. Sorry, Ben, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, one of the things that kind of blew my mind when I first learned Prolog was it's sort of symmetrical. You can run queries backwards or forwards. So we think about programming and finding a solution to an equation. In Prolog, you can say, here's the solution that I have for this equation. What are the inputs that would have produced that solution? Right.
That's awesome. It's been too long since I've looked at it. I was like enamored by it in that university course to the point that I kind of just wanted to leave a little program, Prolog engine just running all the time and tell it things that I knew. And then with the theory that I could go back and just ask it questions later. I never actually did that, but it sounded like fun. All right, so I think that gets us past the programming languages bits. Thank you for your input, Ben. You're welcome to stay around and chime in from time to time if you would like to here for the last few slides, of course. So number 25, avoid default and switch statements. Someone on Twitter commented on this one. And this is the example that I have in the book. I've got an enum class with 2 values, and I've got this function called getName. Sorry, the syntax highlighting is atrocious, non-existent. And I have a default switch statement. I make the argument in the book that you should avoid using a default in your switch blocks, because if I go in and add a new value to my class, to my values enumeration, then the compiler is not going to give me a diagnostic saying that val3 is unhandled. Now, apparently there is an additional flag you can pass to GCC, that will still give you a warning if you have a default and unhandled cases, which can make sense because the range of allowed values for an enumeration is different than the set of values in the enumeration. So it is possible that you could have a valid default fall through case and also want to cover all of the other cases. But I make the argument in the book that you should reorganize your code like this, so that you have the return outside of the switch statement, the default that is outside of the switch statement. Now, one major problem with this is that you really only works if you can return from each case statement instead of breaking. And so it kind of forces you, if you're going to use this style, to move your switch statements into small functions or lambdas. And I don't actually personally have a problem with that because it kind of forces you to make your code a little bit more organized. But it does make you think about how you use your enumerations a little bit differently. I actually, in code that I'm working on right now, W switch enum, thank you. So that's the warning that you can enable to still give you that warning, even if you have a default case. I don't think it's a bad thing. I still am going to prefer building my switch handling blocks into small functions and preferring returns, and aim for this more of a declarative style, which to bring, well, Ben doesn't have to unmute himself, but he gave an excellent talk at CppNow 2018. 2018 on declarative style, which was really good. The other thing that people complain about is use no discard liberally. And there are 2 things we need to address. First, it makes the code very wordy. And second is, when do we actually apply no discard? So this is actually a realistic function signature in my code. This is not at all surprising that I would have a no discard const expr thing that returns something in the name, and then you've got a const and no except. And you look at this, and what the function is actually declaring just gets lost in the soup of keywords. And it can be ugly, I agree. But we do actually want a warning if someone calls get value and doesn't return the value, right? I just noticed Arthur's comment that my adjectives are in the correct order. Okay. We do want a warning if someone calls get value and doesn't use the return value. So I try to mitigate the noise at least a little bit with colors, pick and choose. You can gray things out in your syntax highlighting, and then you don't have to see all of the same words anymore if you don't want to. That's true. I did miss the chance to add final or override, although with a const auto reference return type. Well, no, I still could have done that. You're right. Okay. So when to use no discard? Whenever a const member function returns value. Now I see a comment that MISA guidelines treat any non-void function as no discard. I don't think that's correct either. So if we have in place back, for example, which returns a reference to the newly created object, calling that and ignoring the return value is totally valid. We don't need to work on the value that was returned from in place back. And if we ever get the ABI breaking return a reference to the object that was just pushed back in vector, same thing. It's not an error to ignore the return value here, but it is almost 100% guaranteed to be an error if we ignore the return value from vector size. Vector size should be declared const. And I don't know if my mouse pointer is probably not showing up here. Vector size absolutely should be declared const, and vector empty, yes. Well, it's, yeah, okay, all right, look, I'll get to empty in just a second. Yeah, use no discard in places where it doesn't make sense to discard the return value, but it's I think it's a relatively easy rule. It's non-const member function, const member functions that return or free functions that return. So all these function declarations can make our code wordy, and it's hard to see the benefit, but I see, yes, I have the actual note here from STL. This was in, I think I saw Arthur's in the room. Arthur's article was an argument of pro-liberal use for pro-liberal use of no discard, and STL commented on this on Reddit. And STL says the classic mistake is calling v.empty instead of v.clear. So you want .empty to have no discard so that you get a warning, where clear actually clears the vector of all of its values. The iteration one is awesome. Yes, if you spot the bug in the iteration one on the last line, go ahead and share it here. Remove or remove if without using the erase remove idiom is sorted being dropped on the floor instead of asserted. That's interesting, just calling is sorted. So the error is in the middle bit. Yeah, it's missing a logical and between the C1.end and the C1.end and I2. We've got a comma. That's a comma operator, which means it's only actually checking to see if I2 does not equal C2.end. It's throwing away the first one. Yeah, operator comma strikes again. The other thing, and I'm right up at my time here, which is great because I'm just about out of slides, is the C++ is not object-oriented. I did not share the book on LinkedIn. Someone else did. And someone on LinkedIn who I did not know, who had only read the table of contents, decided to take strong issue with this particular statement, saying that I was setting up straw man arguments and that kind of thing. Yeah, it's true that C++ does allow for object-oriented programming paradigms. It is also true that C++ is not a pure object-oriented programming language. There are very few of those. C++ is a multi-paradigm programming language, and OOP is just one thing that it supports. So why did I put this item in my book? It's because I still regularly get requests for training and contracting where people say they want me to teach modern object-oriented techniques or something like that. First of all, object-oriented is not modern. And second of all, if you're focusing on object-oriented, you are not getting the best value out of C++. So it's the wrong focus for C++, is to think of it as an object-oriented programming language. So what about the best, worst practices? When this talk was shared on Twitter, Bryce says, no, I want the best, worst practices, not the worst, best practices. So the best, worst practices that I came up with while preparing this talk, hopefully I didn't take too much artistic license here, is taking away time from the precious few minutes you have in your life to comment on the person who is giving a talk instead of the content of the talk. Life is short. I do not understand why people take time out of their lives to do this. And assuming that you know more than the speaker or the core developers of an open source project or whatever that you are looking at. It's surprising how often people come in, and it's happened to me a couple of times, but it happens far more to other people that I know, where they'll come in and just assume that you as the core developer of the project somehow don't know what you're talking about and you need to be corrected or instructed on something. Instead, you should treat people with respect regardless of who they are, what they look like, and assume that they know something that you don't know, which is always the case. I've interviewed hundreds of people on CppCast, and I've learned something from every single one of them. Everyone has expertise and a knowledge and skill base that you don't have for the most part. It's like impossible to find someone with the exact same skill set you have. And see what you can learn from other people. So this is it. This is my last slide. If you want to go back and you're curious, the original blog articles are the Nobody Understands articles on my website. The O'Reilly video, you can still go back and look at that. My C++ coding standards document, which is forkable, it's been forked by lots of people. They apparently use it internally for their coding standards, and there's a link to the book. But otherwise, I'll hang out for a few more minutes if we have any other questions. And after a short break, I guess I will rejoin the virtual world and see you all in the thing, whatever it's called. I forget what it's called now. Due to your experience, I have one question to ask. I've always wondered, is there a performance benefit to using lambdas? If there is, how do we recognize a good place to use lambdas? That's from the anonymous attendee. I think it's probably simplest for me to refer you to the 13-part series on lambdas that I've done on C++ Weekly, which should be relatively findable. It's on the list of, it's a playlist on all of the lambdas. But I will say lambdas in a debug build, it's possible that they're going to add some overhead. In a release build, they'll never add overhead, and it's possible that they'll actually improve performance, because a lambda, because of reasons, is more likely to be inlined than a regular free function. So it could go both ways there. So yeah, there's great. Well, it looks like we just got the one question, and we will wrap things up. Oh, another question from Brian. Okay. Do you have any best practice for dealing with context-aware functions that need to call C code? No, you just have to be sad, Brian. I'm sorry. Assuming you're still at the same job that I last knew you were at. I don't know, actually. I think I would need to see a specific example of what you're looking at to see if I could help you come up with a solution, but I see that as a potential problem. Someone asked, not in the Q&A, but in the chat room, are you planning to restart the game series at some point on C++ Weekly? Oh, I have plans for the game series. I just have to work on them. Do you have any advice on how to deal with any enumerations in a real world, with many enumerations in a real world project? Oh, goodness gracious. Do you mean many different enumerations or many different values in an enumeration? But absolutely, if you have a real world project that has lots of different enumerations, you really need to have them as enum class or enum struct, because, well, I've just been preferring enum struct lately, but whatever. They mean the same thing, because strongly typed enumeration is going to reduce the number of possible errors that you have for accidentally passing a value from one type of enumeration to a function that expects a different type of enumeration. And this has been covered pretty well by Victor Chura and his talks that he's given at CppCon about applying clang tidy across a large code base. So I would look at his stuff.